last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from David Clegorn, and I'm going to ask again, Pankti, to please introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Paul. I will now be introducing our last speaker, David Clegorn. He serves as the Chief Housing Officer for Help USA and oversees the permanent housing development and operations for the organization. This includes management of the pre-development process, financing and construction, and long-term asset management and building operations. Additionally, he is a key member of the central leadership team at Help USA, participating in ongoing organizational planning and strategy. He has been integral in the organization's expansion through developments for LGBT seniors in the Bronx, veterans, and family housing, to name a few. David has a strong background in community-based real estate development with a focus on affordable and supportive housing. Thank you, David, for joining us today, and I invite you to kindly make your presentation.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to participate. I think I'm probably considered to be like the practitioner of the group, maybe the one that is working day to day, sort of in the field, so to speak. I am the Chief Housing Officer at Help USA. We're based here in New York. If you go right to that second slide there, the one with the map, yep. We're based here in New York City. We're an organization of close to 2,000 people now. We like to call ourselves a national organization. We're sort of kind of a national organization. We're in these different states and also Nevada, which is pretty far away from New York. If you're in New York, I can see that if you're in Italy, it probably seems pretty close together. And we're very well aware of that parking lot of homeless people in Las Vegas, which was a very terrible idea by the city. We operate homeless shelters for families and for single adults. We also operate domestic violence shelters, and we develop and create affordable housing. You can go to the next slide. This is just sort of a general overview of what the organization does. We operate programs to try to keep people from becoming homeless. If they are homeless, then we operate the shelters with an army of staff that's designed to try to get people back into permanent housing as quickly as possible. And then we build permanent supportive housing and affordable housing, which is really the work that I do. That picture on the bottom right, not a picture, but a rendering, is a building that we're about to open really any minute. We're going to get our certificate of occupancy, and that'll be our newest project for senior citizens that have identified as LGBTQ and are also low income and homeless. Go to the next slide. So we've, on the permanent affordable housing front, I've been in this working in affordable housing, either at neighborhood-based community development corporations or now for the last 8 years at a larger nonprofit. I've been doing it for quite a while, and there's certain best practices, and those best practices have generally been, up until recently, try to build dense, try to get as many people housed as possible, try to create economies of scale on your development budgets and your financing costs so that you can most effectively help the most people. And it's a model that works really well. If that building in the building on the left in Buffalo, those apartments are pretty small, sort of some of them about the size of the apartments that Ricardo just showed. And the same goes for the one in the middle. The middle one is sort of an example of what New York City has been doing in the last few years, where that's 48 apartments that you can't tell from the picture, but that building was built on the site that 2 single-family houses were on in the Bronx. It goes up 7 floors, and it has 48 apartments in it that are less than 500 square feet each for single, formerly homeless seniors. They're really packed in there, though. It's a very dense building. The one on the right is just a picture of the building that was in the rendering. So you can go to the next slide. So, we're just sitting here building permanent supportive housing and operating shelters and minding our own business. And then we get slammed with a global pandemic back in March. And we had to quickly pivot and figure out how to deal both on the shelters and in our permanent housing to keep people safe. Here in New York, our shelters are quite literally people on top of each other. The single adult shelters are dormitory style. You have 4 or 5 people in a room, and our family shelters are basically small apartments. In our permanent housing, we have a lot of supportive housing, so folks with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, anxiety issues that we had to be very careful about making sure that those folks felt safe and comfortable in their homes. And the approaches we took were really different, drastically different, depending on the shelters and the permanent housing. And I'm focusing on the permanent housing. So, we immediately went into an enhanced cleaning protocol. We put directional signs in the buildings, temporary hand washing stations. We had Doctors Without Borders came into New York and came and visited a lot of permanent supportive housing sites and helped people figure out a strategy for keeping people safe. We were able to quickly buy enough personal protective equipment for our staff and for our residents. And we came up with policies to encourage permanent housing residents to isolate if they had been exposed or if they had been sick. And we were really sort of pleased that in New York City, we didn't have a single person in permanent housing pass away from COVID. We had 3 in our portfolio, which is unfortunate. And we had very few in our homeless shelters. So our response was really good. I think we were out in front of it. The issue, though, becomes one of how do you continue to pay for that level of service. Revenues, the rents are down in our portfolio by about 12%, and our costs are up by about 20%. And it's important to understand that before, in these kind of housing projects, you have very little net operating income to begin with. They're more or less designed that way. So when there's an off-balance situation like this, it really causes some problems. We're fortunate enough to have building reserves and an opportunity to fundraise because we're a nonprofit, but that's not a long-term solution. We are a city developer. We're an urban developer. All of our projects are in cities. We believe that there's going to continue to be a need for permanent and supportive housing in urban areas. There's really many barriers to entry for poor people moving into the suburbs. There's zoning restrictions, there's density restrictions, there's lack of access to transportation and jobs. People not wanting the children of poor people in their schools. It goes on and on. It's a very ugly situation. So we're sort of continuing along. We've got 2 projects in construction that we just closed on the financing. And what are we going to do? How are we going to make our buildings safer for people? We also assume that there will be there'll be an end to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 crisis, but you'd have to be kind of crazy to think that there won't be something else in the future that comes up similar to this. We hope that it won't, but you can't plan on hope. So we're starting to rethink how do we build apartment buildings that are safer. So we're really looking at directions. How do we get people to move into, go into the building, into their apartment, and out of their apartment, out to the street level with the most amount of space possible? How do we make sure that the buildings are fully wired and accessible for people at low income and fixed incomes to have access to quality internet so that they can work from home and go to school from home? And how do we integrate some new technology into our buildings to keep people safe? There's you hear about products that are being developed that will bathe elevators in UV lighting or disinfectant sprays. Just this morning, I'm in my office. Our maintenance guy came walking down the hallway looking like he was in the movie Ghostbusters with this fogger spray that he's spraying all over the building, which is he tells me totally safe for me to be breathing. So, you know, we have to confront those issues and figure out how to do that, and figure out how to do that in a way that it can be paid for. Because simultaneous to, you know, this pandemic here in New York especially, but all over the United States, has caused a huge financial crisis for cities. And cities are some of the primary drivers to funding these projects. So we're going to really need to have some creative thought and work towards making these buildings safer in a way that people feel comfortable. And I'll give one quick anecdote, and then I'll wrap up. We have, like I said, most of our projects are supportive housing, which means we have formerly homeless people with mental health issues, substance abuse issues living in our buildings. I got a 9 or 10 page handwritten letter from one of our residents in Philadelphia who's convinced that our site staff are trying to steal his VA money, and they're doing so by poisoning him through the air conditioning system. And we're not doing that, I can assure you. But he believes that we're doing that, and we have supportive service people that are working with him. But how is an individual like that going to feel if they get into an elevator and there's a UV light, or if the Ghostbuster guy's walking around the building spraying some kind of fog everywhere? Those are some real issues that we have to deal with when you're working with sensitive and vulnerable populations. I believe I hit all the points I wanted to hit. So I think I'll wrap up there with just one thing, since I got a bunch of really smart Columbia kids on the line. Feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for internships. We could always use some help.
No better way to conclude your presentation. David, thank you so much for the excellent content and the invitation for SEPA's extraordinary students to reach out to you for potential job opportunities.